Hi there and welcome to day 4, and we're talking about the concept of time. So the first thing I want to do today is a little exercise. Again, it's pretty simple. All you need is a pen and paper, and I want you to do 3 things. The first thing is write down how many hours per week you work. Then write down the main activities that you do per week. So it could be like email, meetings, writing reports, things like that. You don't have to go into every little detail. You could have one category other, but put the main things there that you do. And then take a bit of time to think about per week, how much time do you spend on each activity, so that it adds up to the total amount of hours that you work per week. So you might need a few minutes to think about that and to write that down. So you can pause the video, and then when you're done, you can click play and continue. Alright, so you should now have a list with all the main activities you do each week and an estimate of how many hours you spend on each activity per week. Now, when I do this exercise with people in trainings I've done in the past, a few interesting things happen, and you can compare to your own list and see if that maybe also happened to you. So one is that many people, if they have a 40-hour work week, they will make their activities add up to 40 hours exactly, but they will forget that they also take breaks. And I'm not even talking about the lunch break. Most people remember to not include that. But just little breaks, like you go to the toilet, maybe you get interrupted by a colleague, maybe you go for a walk, maybe you smoke, you go for a cigarette break. So that all adds up. Then there are interruptions, like a colleague comes over, of course, distractions that we've talked about. So this exercise is to make you aware of where your time really goes. And even if you don't do anything with it after this, you already, by having done the exercise and by looking at some of these points and maybe thinking a bit more if there are things you forgot, you will realize that you don't have as many hours to actually do work. And so if you look at my time, for example, working kind of a normal week, working pretty hard, I get to 35 hours of focused work. Most people who work 40-hour weeks, when they literally track their time, they will find out that probably they have 25 to 30 productive hours, and even that is on the high end. So it can be really beneficial to track your time for a while. You can do it automatically by installing something like Rescue Time, and also Saint, we're coming out very soon with a reports function. But I do find that it's very useful also to do it manually for a while, even though it's, of course, a very annoying, tedious job. But by doing it manually, you're really aware of where your time is going. So here's again the spreadsheet that we also saw in day 1, but it has an extra column that we didn't talk about yet on day 1, and that's the column there on the right. That column there on the right gives you the opportunity to put in, on the most right one is the estimate, and then on the more left column you can put in how long it actually took you. At least try to do it for 1 or 2 weeks, and I'm sure if you've never tracked your time before, you will definitely run into some surprises, and that will be very useful knowledge that you can use in the future to improve your focus, your productivity, and your planning. The last thing I want to show in today's video ties back into what we read about in today's lesson. So if you look at this screen, this is a screenshot of my desktop when I'm in a session. And so you will notice 2 things when I'm in a Saint session. One is, if you're not familiar with Saint, the green arrow points that out. That's the visual progress bar of Saint, which is basically timing a focus session for me, but without showing a timer. So, the bar represents the time that I set. For example, this could be 25 minutes. And because the orange bar is almost at the end, it means I've almost reached 25 minutes. But then the yellow arrow points out there is no clock there. Normally, most people have a clock there, or if you're on Windows, it would be in the bottom. And so my clock is hidden. And the reason I hide my clock is because if you have your clock there constantly on the desktop, it's a bit like you are like this. It's like you're constantly looking at a clock. So just imagine yourself sitting in front of a clock and staring at it. And then what will happen to the passage of time? Of course, it will go really slowly. And you might get certain thoughts. You might think, oh, it's almost 6 o'clock with this clock. It's almost 6 o'clock, almost dinner time. Or, in 2 hours I have this meeting with my boss. This can really stand in the way of reaching flow. And flow is kind of a state of ultimate concentration. Now, the things that make up flow and that help you to get into a state of flow are having a clear goal that you're working towards and getting feedback on whether you're progressing towards that goal, whether you're making it. It's also influenced by your ability to concentrate. So that means, we've already talked about that, for example, removing distractions. If there's a lot of distractions, it's hard to get into a state of flow. Also, it's about removing awareness of worries. So if you're very worried, something we'll also look about when we're talking about the mind on day 8, but also just simple worries like the time, and that's why it's so good to remove the clock. So if you're very worried about something, it's like, oh, this meeting is coming up, it's also hard to get in a state of flow. And the last element of getting into a state of flow is whether it's challenging. So if what you're doing is way too simple, you don't have to think at all, then you will not really get into this deep state of concentration called flow. But if it's too complicated, if it's way too hard, then you're also not going to reach it. This concept of flow is very important. It's it is the ultimate state of concentration. Is when you really forget about yourself, you forget about time. Time seems to be flying. You're just completely absorbed in the task that you're doing. So that's kind of what if you really want to concentrate, what you should be striving for. And so then you should keep these elements in mind. And that's why I mentioned this here in this chapter, because it does also really tie back to time. Because if you're too focused on the time, you will not be able to reach this state of flow. But on the other hand, if you don't have anything to measure, if there's no kind of display of progress, which of course relates to timing, then you can also not get into a state of flow. And that's why I so highly recommend that at least you hide your clocks, and also using some kind of timer or using that visual progress bar of Seint, because it will really help you to get into this state of flow. That's everything for today. And tomorrow we're going to talk about energy.